Hello, everyone watching this interview. My name is Nicholas Williams. I'm currently the Director of Bands at the University of Georgia and the most recent host of the CBDNA National Conference in 2023. I'm pleased to join CBDNA as a part of this oral history project, an initiative designed to provide those in the profession and interested observers with a historical look at the development of the organization, its leaders, and key initiatives, and how the organization came to be what it is today. I'm really pleased to be here with my friend, colleague, and mentor, Eugene Corporon. And I know that you all know this name and this person and this figure. But for those of you who might be watching years and decades from now, from when we're recording this in December of 2023, those of you who might not know Eugene Migliaro Corporon, he's currently the Regents Professor of Music and the Director of Wind Studies at the University of North Texas. Professor Corporon's career spans 6 decades of professional teaching, artistry, conducting, and 3 of those decades have been at the University of North Texas, where I was fortunate enough to be a next door neighbor colleague of Eugene's for 16 years at North Texas. Professor Corporon is a giant in our profession. His legacy of artistry and conducting, teaching, musicianship, recordings are profound. And correct me if I'm wrong, Gene, but as a conductor, I think I've got this right. You've released over 150 recordings, and if you count individual tracks and pieces, that number is well over 1,000, which to me, I'm quite sure makes you the most recorded conductor probably in the history of music.
I don't know about that, but yes, the way I like to say it is that we've done 150 discs because some of them have been double disc sets or teaching music through performance and band kind of sets where there were multiple discs within a particular project. So,
awesome.
Who would have guessed?
Yeah, you've done great things for our profession, and we thank you for that. In addition to all of that, you are a past president of CBDNA, as well as a Lifetime Achievement Award recipient from the CBDNA group. So welcome to this interview. And maybe we can get started with having you just talk about your background, your teaching career, your professional conducting, maybe what led you to CBDNA, why you were interested in leading this important organization in our profession.
Sure. I started teaching in 1969 at Mount Miguel High School in Spring Valley, California, after graduating from Cal State Long Beach, where my mentor and teacher was Robert Reynolds and also Don Wilcox and also Charles Yates over the time I was there. I was at a crossroads when I left, when I finished my senior year, thinking I might want to play clarinet in a professional setting somewhere. I wised up after being offered probably the best high school instrumental music job in the state of California at the time at Mount Miguel High School. And it was a place I had taught in the summers to help them with woodwind teaching and instruction. And so after a lot of thinking, I ended up taking that job. I did the orchestra, the band, and the jazz and the marching band while I was there. I was there only 2 years, and then I was offered a job at Cal State Fullerton by another mentor of mine, clear back to 3rd grade, Benton Miner, who was a masterful teacher in the state of California, and he had gotten the job at Cal State Fullerton. And I went to work as his assistant there for 3 years while I worked on my master's and finished that up. Then I moved to the University of Wisconsin as the 3rd assistant with Robert Reynolds and Mike Leckrone. And I did that job the first year I was there. And the second year, by some weird stroke of insanity on the part of the chair of the school, I was asked to take over the wind ensemble symphonic band job when Bob left there to go to Michigan, which was totally unexpected by all of us, even him at the time. I don't think he really thought it would be on the horizon quite that soon. Spent a good deal of time there, 4 years. So my jobs went 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And then I decided it was best for me if I went somewhere where I would have to make the program my own. And I was lucky to teach at Wisconsin and work with those wonderful students, but I thought it was better for my eventual personal growth to go somewhere where I was the person who was going to make the program what Bob had made his program at Wisconsin. So I went to the University of Northern Colorado, broke my setup. I went from, I should have been there 5 years, but I was there 6. There's a moral to this story in a minute. I then went to Michigan State University for 3 years, then the Cincinnati College Conservatory for 7, and then ended up applying for the job at the University of North Texas after a phone call I got from Martin Mailman, who was a composer I had played a lot of, and he was on the faculty and gave me a call and said, I don't know if you've noticed, but I had admired North Texas under Bob Winslow's leadership. I'd heard them at conferences. I just knew, and I knew Texas was a hotbed of great public school teaching. So I applied for the job. Now, when I applied, there were some people that were worried based upon what I just told you that I wouldn't stay, right? Now, those same people are worried that I won't leave. But you know, I wasn't ever looking for another job. It's just things would happen. I would get an opportunity and I would always walk through the door and figuring, you know, hopefully it wasn't locked behind me when I got on the other side, that I could always go back because I always loved what I was doing. So it was when I started at Fullerton that I heard about this strange organization, the CBDNA. And on the end, about this strange conference, it was held every December, the Midwest Conference. In California, we didn't even know there was a Midwest. We had no idea what was out there. So on the advice of Robert Reynolds, I started going to the Midwest. And also I got involved in CBDNA, became a member and started going to conferences and taking advantage of all the great things that go on in the organization. One thing that was interesting at that period is that there was still this, and this is historical, I think, there was still this kind of argument going on as to what's a wind ensemble and is that going to hurt the symphonic band or the symphony band? We were still in kind of this, a little bit of siloed camps, a little bit. And even though Fred Fennell in '52 had kind of, I think, solved the problem by saying, we'll play everything. Let's play small music, medium music, big music. We're just going to play everything. But that was kind of, that along with the questioning of what our instrumentation should be was still kind of residually hanging in the balance. Like, should there be alto clarinets? Should there be how many, you know, how many clarinets make the right size group, and on and on. And so there were all sorts of discussions that went on for many, many years about that, most of which centered around when Eastman was formed their wind ensemble, when Fred formed the wind ensemble. But what we know now is that the wind ensemble was simply Eastman's way and Fred's way of garnering more repertoire, reaching out to more repertoire. And I always like to say that Frederick Fennell didn't invent the wind ensemble, he discovered it. It was there. The repertoire was already there. The Stravinsky Symphony of Winds was there. The harmony music, Mozart and Beethoven and Handel and Haydn and Dvorak, and it was all there. So he wanted to reach out to that. Gabrielli was there, so he wanted to reach out to that music. So he kind of turned over, I think, the instrumentation of our ensemble to the composers. So Gunther Schuller, if you want to write a piece that takes 110 players to play it, please write it, and he did. But on the same side of things, if Hartley wants to write something for just 23 players, he could do that, and they play that. So we moved on from that instrumentation issue, I think. But for a while, there was a coexisting group, the National Wind Ensemble Conference. And for a while, it looked like there might, be a split. and this is just my recollection, but it all kind of came back together, thank goodness, because really instrumentation is all about your school and people you have to serve. And I'm at a school where we have 26 euphonium majors. So if I put one in the wind symphony, the euphonium teacher is going to be knocking on my door saying, hey, what am I going to do with all these players? So sometimes our instrumentation is driven by, the necessity of your school situation. And same with the names of groups. There's so many different names. And we've resolved that by just saying, everybody name your group whatever you want. And it works out. We have symphonic wind ensemble, we have wind ensemble, we have wind symphony, we have symphonic philharmonia, we have all sorts of different names, no different than the orchestra. They're exactly the same. New York Phil, Chicago Symphony, some orchestras even call themselves bands. It's okay. But it was a very interesting time early on in CBDNA. My membership was kind of in this, what I call the second triumvirate of people, maybe quartet of people, including Don Hunsberger and Frank Battisti and John Painter. And anytime you start making a list, you leave people out, Frederick Fennell, Bill Ravelli. You had those unbelievable icons who had formed and developed this idea of professional growth and a way to continue it, probably based a little bit on the ABA model too, of getting band conductors together. And it goes all the way back to the Renaissance, the Schola Minstrolums that went on, where people got together during Lent and talked about their art. We still have that happening today. The International Trumpet Society, International Clarinet, the International Trombone, the conductors, we still get together in groups and swap ideas, repertoire and other things. So, but it was an interesting time to come in because I felt unsettled at first. And I think I've been in it through the time where it settled down and where we turned back to the music and to the composers. We don't fight with each other as much as maybe they used to. I'm not so sure characterizing it as a fight is the best way to do it, but we had this wonderful healing moment at North Texas, thanks to Dennis Fisher, who thought one year when we were going to, it was before I was there, when North Texas was going to the conference, TMEA conference, he said, well, every time we go, we play, we show off, everybody claps and we leave. Why don't we do something for the band conductors in Texas? Let's invite Bill Ravelli, Mark Hinesley, and Frederick Fennell to campus. And let's have an event where each of them will conduct a march and one of their favorite pieces with North Texas Wind Symphony, and then be on a panel and discuss public school music education. And we are so fortunate to have all of that on film. It's offered by GIA Music to this day. And Dennis was just brilliant in coming up with this, and Dennis and Robert. And it was a wonderful event. And I think the state really appreciated it, got to know these three icons who were there at the beginning, of CBDNA. And it was fun to watch all three of them show so much respect for one another, knowing the background of Frederick Fennell's being kind of pointed out as a spoiler at first, as someone who was rocking the boat. Here they are at the end of their careers, all friends, all acknowledging what each of them had to offer to our profession, which was huge. And it was a terrific event. And I think actually it was replicated with three other people later at a WASB conference by Glenn Price, who got Bob Reynolds, Don Hunsberger, and Frank Battisti to do a similar situation, conduct a youth wind ensemble and speak about their careers. But it healed, which was the important thing. It all was fine. And we quit arguing over whether or not Emblems was a very good piece or not. We paid for it finally, I think, and said, okay, we'll buy it. It's not Appalachian Spring, but okay. And we started reaching out to unbelievable composers who have defined our repertoire even further. And it was thanks, all these people I've mentioned were people who commissioned music. and their primary goal in life seemed to be get more repertoire into the discipline from as a diverse a situation as they could. And we're still doing that. That's one of our tenets. So I think I just served when I could. I would get on a committee. I would be in various things. Eventually, the way it works, as everybody knows in CBDNA, you kind of work your way up. You have to be a vice president in a region, then a president in the region. Then you go to vice president on the national side if you get elected, and then you can be elected president, but you have to have that background so that you understand the whole organization. And I think that's a really wise way to do it, because you really understand how difficult it is to hold a regional conference on pretty much no money, and you understand how important it is to meet as many of the needs as you can for the membership that all has different approaches to what they hope to get from the conferences, and also just to see how much camaraderie and collegiality there is in our profession. I think that's really remarkable. It remains that way, and I think that's really good.
That's great. Thank you, Gene. So I want to come back soon to talk about your time as president, and what your ideas were, and your agenda, if you want to use that word. But you've mentioned a couple things that I'd like for you to talk a little bit more about, especially in terms of CBDNA's reach throughout the time that you've seen it, in two areas. One, the repertoire that's been developed throughout this time, and also the idea of professional growth. So maybe we could talk about each one of those separately, starting with the repertoire. I'd forgotten until you just mentioned that CBDNA commissioned emblems, correct? And a
Correct.
lot of the membership at the time wanted / expected that Copeland was going to create another Appalachian Spring. And so here comes Emblems, which of course is totally different. And I can only imagine the post-concert conversations that were happening then. But in general, what are your thoughts about CBDNA's role in the growth of the rep, and as well as the idea of professional growth in general?
Yeah, it's significant. Repertoire is so significant. We're nothing without something to play. My students have heard me say way too often, we can't find our future in the orchestra's past. It's just, as well as we play transcription, sometimes better than orchestras in our history. If we were to remain a viable medium, we needed to have our own repertoire. That doesn't mean we need to stop playing transcriptions. The orchestra hasn't stopped playing transcriptions either. They play Bach Toccata Fugue in D minor as often, maybe not quite as often as we do, but they play it. So repertoire, it's just burned in my brain that it's an important thing. And mostly because of CBDNA and my association with them. Another piece that CBDNA commissioned is the Doll Sinfonietta, by the way. I mean, and those, those are two iconic pieces, Copeland Emblems, Doll Sinfonietta. And my gosh, how crazy would people have thought we were if we had commissioned Prague the same year that we got Emblems? I mean, there would have been a massive, it would have been like the Rite of Spring riot. We weren't ready for it, you know. I think in retrospect, as we look back on Emblems especially, we did get Appalachian Spring. If you realize the piece is based on Amazing Grace, first and foremost, there's rural America. It was a division between urban America and rural America. And I think we wanted a rural American piece. Copeland, we got first class Copeland in the period he was writing. We got a real piece in that style that he was writing at the time. And Jack Stamp does a wonderful lecture about this, where he bounces back and forth between orchestral music from Copeland at that very same period and Emblems. And man, you hear the real Copeland. Copeland wasn't someone who stayed put in Appalachia. He kept moving. And so, which was a model for us too. It was a model for us too. We need all types of music, is what we finally have come to realize, I think. But I think the idea that we were at the forefront on those kinds of pieces is pretty, it set us up as a model for what we were trying to accomplish. And I think ABA was trying to do the same kinds of things with their commissions. We began to feel like, yeah, and Fred Fennell always used to say, you know, if you want a good piece, you got to ask them for it. He wasn't afraid to call somebody up and ask for a piece and say, oh, by the way, we have no money. You know, we'll just give you a great performance. And for a while that worked. Another one like that is Robert Boudreau. My goodness, the number of pieces he commissioned. It's unfortunate for the euphoniums and the saxes that they were excluded, but we still got this phenomenal body of repertoire that we still play today that was written for the American Wind Symphony. So you got to ask, and sometimes you get a great piece and sometimes you don't. You take a chance, and sometimes you get a great piece and you don't know it. And it takes a little while for it to settle in and for our ears to be ready. People who go back to emblems now go, what was, I play it for my students and mention it, you know, there was some controversy. They go, about what? To them, it's the most tame thing they've ever heard. You know, I mean, 2 keys at once, gosh, you know, like we now, that's kind of commonality in our inner ear. We don't recoil quite so much. But so I think repertoire was really important, the commissioning project. I went back and was reviewing the conference that was my conference at 2001, our conference, but that I helped to organize, and looked at the pieces that were commissioned for that conference. And there we were, you know, Gary Hill was running the commissioning project and did a phenomenal job getting some great pieces out of people. And that was quite about the, it's about halfway through my career was when I was president of CBDNA. And so, I mean, I think it's just exponentially exploded, the amount of commissions and pieces that we are part of. That was one of the things we did, which is figure out that it was better to be part of a consortium. We could get more for our money if we joined together to commission a piece. Because some people's budgets were much more than 1,000 a year for music. And when somebody needed 5,000 or 10,000 to write a piece, you had to bail out. So we devised ways through various committee chairs in CBDNA to put our resources together to be able to get bigger and bigger amounts of money to commission, you know, people who were more expensive. So that's the repertoire side of it. Is that okay for you on that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And then the second part was the idea of professional growth, which now is it's commonplace with a lot of organizations throughout our profession and outside of the profession. I'm imagining maybe that concept for CBDNA originally was kind of a new concept of mentoring and development. So could you talk a little bit more about that professional growth side of it?
Sure. There was, I think one of the earliest conducting workshops was the CBDNA conducting workshop that Mighty Johnson was the chair of, and it was held every summer. That was the first time I heard about that. I applied to go as a member, and the clinician for that week was Frederick Fennell and Bob Reynolds, but the two of them working together, and it was at the University of Wisconsin. Little did I know that later that might be my home, but this is a vivid memory for me because I really wanted to go, and I was a young conductor, and I was scared to death to do it. I was teaching at Cal State Fullerton, and I'm thinking to myself, who am I to apply for this? There's people who have real jobs. I'm just an assistant here. But I did, and I got accepted to go. So there was a list of repertoire we needed to learn, and I was working on it. And my hope had been to have memorized every piece. That's before I realized I had a horrible memory, and that wasn't ever going to happen. So I remember vividly calling Robert Reynolds and saying, Bob, I'm going to pull out of this because I don't have the pieces memorized. I wanted to be better prepared. And somehow he goes, I don't accept that. It's typical of Bob. He said, well, that's not possible for you to pull out. You're coming and you'll be here and see you in a couple of weeks or 3 weeks or 5 weeks. And so I got you don't, at that point you go, oh, okay, I'll be there. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go, but at least I'll get there. I have no idea how this works. At least when I get there, I'll be able to see what other people do and have some sense of it. and before I have to get up and do this. So, so the first meeting, I think Sunday night or something, we drew straws to see who would go first. I get to go first. Now I'm a wreck. And so the next day comes my time to get up in front of the Wisconsin Wind Ensemble and conduct the Holst second suite with Fred Fennell sitting in the front row with his arms crossed, looking at me and going, "Let's see what you've got." Basically, he didn't really say that, but and I put my hand up and I was like foot fumbler. I had a automatic vibrato in my hand. I was so worried, and I got through it somehow. And it was trial by fire. But from that point on, I didn't miss a conducting symposium for the next 50 years because I've either hosted one or been at one. And every summer, we hosted the National CBDNA Conducting Symposium in Northern Colorado for the whole time I was there. And people like Mike Haithcock came, some wonderful people. Jerry Junkin came to, and we'd have Bob Reynolds there. We'd have John Painter there. We'd have Ray Kramer there. We'd have people there teaching. And it was a chance for all of us to be very accepting of one another. Everybody was very encouraging. The teaching was encouraging. The fellow participants, men and women, were very encouraging to one another. And so we made this kind of commitment to ourselves to host this, and it moved around. It was at Michigan for a while. It moved all over the place, but we continued to develop it and to offer it. And then, of course, many other kinds of conducting workshops broke away using those early CBDNA workshops as a model, where you spend some time talking repertoire and analysis and philosophy, and then time conducting. And we all have similar workshops now all over the country, which is fantastic. Some are 2 days, some are 1 day. I don't know how that works so well. Others are 2 weeks. That's crazy. That's what ours goes. So it just depends on where you go, but they've been a great device for improving our ability to express ourselves on the podium. And I think CBDNA has a lot to be proud of with modeling that for all those years and opening that up to not just college band directors, but to also public school teachers who are very interested in improving as well.
That's great. And you reminded me of just this thought that we never know where our careers are going to take us, and the people we meet, how they might come back later, with the story you just told, the first workshop you went to when you're at Fullerton with Fred Fennell. So that would have been in the early 70s, right?
Yeah.
Early 70s. And I don't know if you remember, but you and I were around for one of Fred Fennell's final conducting workshops at Baylor University.
Yeah.
And also, obviously, you doing this workshop at Wisconsin, where you would later teach. It's interesting how things happen and these connections happen with places and people.
Right. That's exactly right. You never know. My first experience with Fred was as a band manager at Cal State Long Beach. Robert brought him in as a guest conductor. I think we were playing in an ABA conference, and he brought Fennell in before that, but then we had Ravelli when we were playing the ABA concert. So we had a wonderful opportunity, including Aaron Copland, to play for a lot of great people there. But I was in charge of getting Fennell from the hotel down by the harbor to the first rehearsal. So I go down to pick him up, and I go to the front desk and I say, I'm here to pick up Dr. Fennell. And go, well, we'll ring his room. And she comes back and says, well, he's not in there. And I went, what do you mean he's not in there? So I checked the restaurant. I came back, are you sure? Try it again. No. And I go, oh, am I in trouble? Here I am. My first job is just get him to the gig, and I can't find him. So I look down the dock, and I see way down at the end, I see this diminutive person with a bright red, white, and blue sweater kind of marching back towards the hotel. And this was at the Long Beach Marina. And I thought, that's him. But what's he doing? So when he got to me, I said, Dr. Fennell, I'm here to take you to the, and he goes, yep. He said, I always like to go on a brisk morning walk. He said, I go out singing the first movement of the Holst. And when I'm finished with it, I turn around and come back singing it again. And that's how I time myself in the distance. I thought, this is great. I couldn't pay for this. This is great. You know? So from that point, say my junior year in college, I knew him, had played for him. And fast forward to my being offered the job at Wisconsin, it was a very interesting time because Bob and I had a lot of talks about it. He said, you have two choices. You can take the job because it just came out of nowhere. We had talked at the beginning. Once he announced his leaving, he said, now, you know, you're not going to get this job. I said, of course I know that. I have no intention of believing that I would have this job. I said, I'm just hopeful somebody really good will come in. I'll get to learn some more from them and be on my way on my career eventually. And then in May, the dean called me in and offered me the job. And I was shocked. I think Reynolds was too. So there was a choice there. Take the job. The way Bob put it, I hope I'm not telling anything that he would mind. The way he put it was, you can jump into the frying pan, or you can stand back and watch somebody else jump into the frying pan. And it's in my nature to jump into the frying pan, so I did. But I went back to the dean and I said, well, I want to take the job, but it's on one condition. I want to hire Frederick Fennell to come to Wisconsin next year for 5 different weeks as a permanent guest conductor, because nobody in the country is going to know who I am, and they're going to think that poor Wisconsin program is going down the tubes. So if we bring Fred in, Giulini was coming into the Chicago Symphony for Schulte. I thought, there you go. Not that I was Schulte, but I said, there you go. We'll have a permanent guest conductor. He can come in. We have 5 different concerts. If he comes in for each of those weeks, teaches the grad students, does a piece on the concert, we have this connection with greatness. And Wisconsin's making a statement that we're still supportive of this WIN program. And the dean bought it, and Fred came in. So in my mind, that was one of the opportunities that fold into what I think was my master's degree. Slowly but surely, I already had my master's, but I mean, it was the real master's because I had him there to study for those times. So I was just as much a student as people like Craig Kirchhoff, who were in my conducting studio at that time, only because he had already quit his high school job to come and study with Bob. And then the rug got pulled out from under him and he tolerated me. But I got him Fred Fennell, so it was a pretty good deal. But anyway, yeah, you never know. You just never know. From that meeting on the dock to having him be a colleague, so to speak, of mine at Wisconsin. And then just years and years of interaction from that point on. Brought him to Northern Colorado, brought him to North Texas, we just interacted for the rest of his life, actually.
That's awesome. I'm thinking about some of the stories that you and I have shared over the years about the major figures in your career that you've come across, Fred being one. Also thinking about some of the composers that you've interacted with and brought to your campus. Copeland, Mio, Persichetti, some of those figures, and maybe at the end, if we have time, we can jump back to that,
Sure.
because I'd love for you to share some of those stories with the audience of this project. But maybe getting back a little bit to your time as president, CBDNA, I just looked up the ensembles that were at the conference that you hosted in 2001, and this list is pretty epic. So those.
Yeah, I have it here in front of me too. Yeah.
So we've got the Dallas Wind Symphony, University of Texas Arlington, the U.S. Air Force Band, which you mentioned, Keystone Wind Ensemble with Jack Stamp, the University of Georgia, good connection there. University of North Texas, obviously, the University of Calgary, Oklahoma State, Northwestern, Texas Tech, Illinois State, and then of course the small college intercollegiate band. That's really an all-star lineup of groups of any decade, really. So maybe could you talk to us about what you remember about that conference,
Sure.
either the setting up and the planning for it, or the conference itself? What sticks out in your mind?
Well, I wanted the conference to be, first of all, it's the first conference of the new millennium. That had significance. I wanted the conference to be reflective of where we had been and where we hope to go. That both those things would work. And I also wanted it to reach out beyond CBDNA. In other words, when you invite, we also had, what we did is we condensed the campus so we could have a week's worth of events, Monday through Saturday. And we told the membership, if you want to come early, Monday night, the River City Brass Band's going to play with Dennis Caldwell. And Tuesday night, the Dallas Wind Symphony is going to play with Jerry Junkin and Frederick Fennell as a guest conductor. Now, those were both kind of outside CBDNA. And I added the days because I didn't want the college bands to think, oh gosh, he's filling up all the spots with non-college bands. This is the CBDNA. We want to have room for the college bands to play. Originally, and then Wednesday night, it just fell into our lap that the U.S. Air Force Band was available, and Lowell Graham offered to bring them there on their tour. So I said, we'll do it, we'll take it. And so Ray's group from UT Arlington did the Chosen Gems session, which was fantastic. And that got us filled out for the first 3 days. What's not on there is that originally, this would have been the coup, but it didn't work out. Norbert Nozy was going to bring the Belgian guides. I mean, and it turned out that Norbert taught at North Texas for a semester, taught saxophone there way back when. So he had this connection. And when he was talking to me about it in Belgium, he said, oh, I remember that Texas barbecue place where we used to go, the one that burned down. You remember that spot?
I do, yeah.
He said, if I could only go there for dinner. Well, at the time he could have, because it hadn't burned down yet. But anyway, it didn't work out. But we had plenty of headliners besides that. So that was one thing. I thought I wanted to be sure we had a wide variety. I mean, you know as well as I do that if you just take the Southwestern Division, you could fill 5 conferences without standing bands. That's probably true of the North Central Division, true of the Southern Division. I mean, there are so many great bands. That's another thing I'd say is something we have to be proud of. Used to be, you pointed at Michigan and Illinois, and then you quit making the list, many, many, many years ago. But over the years, we just have phenomenal ensembles and conductors all over the country. But I wanted to make sure we represented our region. So Oklahoma State and UT Arlington, and of course having Jerry there helped with the Texas connection. But I also wanted to be sure we got some groups outside, and we were able to get Mallard to bring Northwestern all the way. We were able to get Eric Satterwhite to bring Georgia all the way. I mean, we reached out to the Southern Division, North Central Division. We were able to kind of get a nice division representation. And I wanted to show people that, and we all know this, we know it, but the general public doesn't, that there are professional bands, like the Air Force Band. There are professional bands. And in fact, I can say without even stumbling, we place more people in professional settings out of North Texas in bands than we do in orchestras. I've got 3 people who are going into service bands as soon as the semester is over next semester. And we all do. I mean, you see those bands, they all come from great college programs for the most part these days. Also, there were 3 things that were important to me. It was a Hindemith year. It was an anniversary of the Hindemith Symphony. So I have to say, when you plan something like this, it's not one person's plan, at least not the way I saw it. Mike Haithcock was very involved. Jerry Junkin was very involved. The hosts were Dennis Fisher and Brad Ginevra, who was on campus at the time. So we had lots of brains working on this. And so people started offering things up, like Jerry said, well, he says, we have a Hindemith expert at UT, David Newmeyer. Let me ask him if he'd come and talk about Hindemith. And he did. And we learned things about the Hindemith Symphony we had never known before David's lecture, about how it happened and so on, how it became to be. Mike said, well, we've got one of the greatest music history, musicology people on our campus. Richard Crawford has written a great book on the history of music. Maybe he'd come and talk to us about bands, and he did. He came and gave us a lecture on bands, an actual musicologist who could say the word band. I mean, unbelievable. So that was important to me, to try and reach out academically to those folks. And then the other thing I worried about with our past, which was starting to fall away, but this idea of intimidation, fear, and anger as the three most important skills on the podium. I'll scare those kids into playing. I'll yell at those kids. I'll intimidate them, and they'll play their best. Well, we've all learned that doesn't quite get the best. It may get them to play, but they don't play at their best under those circumstances. So I thought, who could I find to help us with that? James Jordan, who came and talked to us about the musician's soul. And I mean, there were people crying at the end of his session. Man, conductor.
Those people who don't know Jim's name, tell us a little bit about James and his background.
Yeah, he's a choral conductor from Westminster Choir College. He's written several books on the psychology of conducting and personal approach of conducting. He's published widely by GIA, and The Musician's Soul was one of his first books. And it really dealt with his relationship with his choirs and how to be personable, demanding, but not intimidating. How to get the best out of people. That's really what a lot of his work's about. And I've worked with him over the years on various projects, but he's a master of the psychology of what we do and how to make things work best for the musicians we work with. As an aside, he was on the faculty at Bucknell with Mallory in one of her earlier jobs. And I met him in a coffee shop, having coffee before going over to Bucknell with Mallory, and we had coffee together. I had no idea that at this, several years later, I'd be inviting him to a CBDNA conference and be working with him, collaborating with him. The other thing I thought maybe would work, but we just ran out of spots, was to get Barry Green involved with the inner game of music. But James kind of filled that spot too. So the one other thing that you mentioned, the intercollegiate band, this was the premiere of the intercollegiate band, 2001.
Oh, I didn't know that.
First one that happened. And Alan McMurray, as immediate past president, was invited to conduct the band. And we, as an attempt to fill the small college concerns, I would hear at every convention I go to, not as an officer, just as a participant. Well, it's all well and good that we hear, the Air Force Band and the Northwestern Band, but what does that mean to me with my 32-piece college band at my small school? Or there's nothing there for me at the conferences. They're all too highfalutin, or they're all too. So we were really sensitive, and have been, I think, continue to be sensitive to trying to meet the needs of the small college band conductor. And we talked about what is a small college band. Is Oberlin a small college band? No. Is Eastman? They don't have a very big college. No. So we determined eventually that you're a small college band if you think you are. That's all we could come up with. But these folks had a point. I don't hear repertoire my band can play. That's why the Chosen Gems sessions came about. And we figured, hey, we can involve more people. People can come and conduct one of the Chosen Gems. So that now they're on the conference, and their school will pay them money to come because they're participating, and they can put that in their resume. And so we started to broaden out what kinds of opportunities we tried to make available to the membership, and maybe small college band conductors could get an opportunity to conduct at the national conference. Because just because you had a smaller job didn't mean you weren't a good conductor. It just meant you were at a different point in your career than some others might be. So I think that's held on. I think we still have the small college honor band, and I have students in my band at North Texas who played in a small college CBDNA band, small college honor band, because they came from small schools. and got this opportunity, and it was meant so much to them, and they went back to their own schools as better leaders and performers. So the conference, I had to go back and look it up, but the conference really kind of encapsulated lots of different things. You can never get to everything you want to get to, but the idea was to try and have it be reflective, of the issues we're all facing or have been facing. And we had research and poster sessions. We also had John Bird give us a lecture on Granger perspectives, Granger's biographer. I mean, we were just so fortunate to pull all these people together, many of whom didn't get a dime, just came and helped us, or we paid for their gas or something. I mean, the budgets for our conferences are limited still today. They're limited because whatever institution takes it on guarantees to make up the difference between the number of people that show up and pay the conference fee and what it costs to give the conference. And we knew when we said we'd like to do it, that we would be taking on a financial obligation to make up the difference. And we put some of our year's funding into that, and it was well worth it for our students and for everybody who was there. But the overall idea was to be as diverse as we could be. I have to mention the two commissions of that year. Gary Hill was in charge of, who's a future president, and was in charge of commissioning project at the time. And he got a piece that's one of my favorites that I've never heard played since, George Walker, to write his piece. We performed the premiere of that at that conference. Well, the other one was Dan Welcher's Songs Without Words, was a commission for that year. But also president was our dear friend to the college band, Michael Doherty. And that was a conference where we invited Joan Tower to come just to kind of check things out, because we had talked about that. Well, maybe if we get these composers just to come and hear how the groups play and get excited about us as a medium, maybe they'd write a piece. Maybe we could convince them to do that. And so we were reaching out even that far back to diversity, composers of diverse backgrounds, and trying to get people interested in writing. And Gary stewarded that and did such a great job with that. It was pretty amazing.
That's great. Thank you. So the piece, George Walker, that was Canvas, right?
Right.
Yeah. And recently, this is off topic, but recently there's been a transcription of his lyric, which was a movement for orchestra, one of his pieces that's been transcribed for band. And I think people are starting to see George Walker as an important American composer. So back to your time as president and as host of the 2001 conference, mentioning the idea of diversity, as well as you wanting that conference to take a look at where we were before 2001, where we were in 2001, thinking about that and where we are now in 2023, what would you say are some of the important changes that you've seen in CBDNA and maybe through our profession in general since that conference, which was 22 years ago almost?
Changes. I just think we've gotten, we've had some wonderful leadership over those years too. We've gotten more and more professional in our outreach, number one. More collaborative, number two. I think we've reached out to other organizations to do joint projects or to be part of what we do, or to join us in certain aspects, even state public school organizations, TMEA, OMEA, all these different, trying to at least make more connections, National Band Association, on and on. Many of our colleagues are members of all those other organizations as well, and sometimes end up being leaders in those organizations as well as CBDNA over the years. We've also done a better job of making room for the marching band conductors and directors, and giving them options at the conferences to share ideas, films, concerns, budgets, all those things everybody's worried about at some places, not Georgia, of course, but places like North Texas, where, I think they expect the faculty to put in half their pay, maybe to help with the football game. But understanding what the collective concerns are of our profession, because I only did marching band for 2 years, and I'm happy to offer up my stick figure drawings that we made on the field to anyone who wants to incorporate them in their show for next fall. We made a tractor once on the field, or made a cuckoo clock. That's the kind of stuff I did. Played a show based on Hello Dolly around the world. So, it's gone to Broadway now. Where things are at, it's incredible. It's like musical theater on the field. And what's going on in the public schools, and then of course in the core style that bleeds into some of the college groups. There are other college groups that maintain their tradition, and that are fantastic to have that, and to still see the Ohio State band spell Ohio. It's still great. Or that Texas Aggie band do step 2 drills or whatever. Everybody's got their thing. Michigan band run out of the tunnel, whoever it is. But we've opened that up so that all of those folks can get together and share ideas. And I think that's important. I think it was important to not just say, well, we're going to be culturally highfalutin concert organization, and we're not going to talk about these other things we do. I think that's a mistake. And I think also through all of it, people's openness and willing to share has been really overwhelming. There's no way I would have had any semblance of success in the profession if I hadn't had mentors, both acknowledged and not. In other words, I remember saying to Frank Battisti once, I said, "You don't know it, but I'm one of your students." And he looked at me kind of strange. I said, "I've been studying you for the last 20 years. We pick these people to follow, Don Huntsberger, Bill Ravelli, and we try to glean the very best off of their approaches. And I'm not talking about their gestures, but their musical integrity, and their belief system, and how it floods over us. And I think we're all composites of everybody else, but CBDNA facilitates that, because we're so busy. We're siloed. We don't see each other for years or throughout the year, and then all of a sudden we all get together for 4 days, and it just, we're exhausted by the end of it. Nobody wants to go to sleep. Everybody, can we hear another concert? Let's do that. Let's talk. Let's go. And we get so busy with ourselves that we don't have time for this growth. So our growth is very intensified, laser-like at these events, and connections are made. People make friends, and lifetime friendships that you never thought might happen. I remember, I want to give you an example of that. I always used to make it a point of trying to get to know people at CBDNA. In other words, following an instruction I got once when I taught with Bob for 1 year at Wisconsin. He said, "We're going to Midwest, and I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to talk to you. I talk to you every day. You go, I'm going to talk to the people I don't ever see. So don't be upset." I go, "Yeah, I won't be." And he was right. You find people, it's easy to hang out with your group of friends at a conference, Midwest or TMEA, and you don't have a chance to reach out. So there was one important aspect I forgot about that I incorporated. We had to incorporate it in the conference. We didn't have any hotels in Denton at the time that were very good. And we had one big hotel right across the freeway, which is now where the football stadium stands, several story high hotel that we made the conference hotel. We had very poor restaurant service. Denton in that period was, it was big news if we got a second McDonald's in town. So we were thinking, how are we going to feed these people? They're used to going to go to Chicago. My gosh, walk 10 minutes in any direction, you're in a world-class restaurant. So Dennis and I and Brad, we decided we would feed everybody at the hotel for every meal. So we had to eat together. Now this might be the Italian in me, but it made for a very interesting conference because we were together the whole time. And there wasn't any way you could, I hate this food, I'm going to get out of here, because there was nowhere to go. So everybody was captured, but we were eating meals together. We were discussing things. It was really healthy. And it was a disadvantage that we turned into an advantage. And everybody had a meal ticket, and we all hung out together for those 3 or 4 days. And it made for great conversation, great opportunities to learn. And you could sit with different people every night. That's my point. You didn't, rather than going out with your same group of friends. So at another conference, I always made it a point when I went to these regional conferences or national, to sit down at a table with people I didn't know. So I came up to a table at one of the conferences, and this is before or after, I guess, after our national conference. And I said, looked at the person sitting there, I said, is that spot taken next to you? He goes, no. You mind if I sit there? No, not at all. I sat down and got to know Jack Stamp, who was a high school band director, who had taken a chance to come to the conference, and a lifelong friendship developed out of that. And I never would have met him had I just hung out with everybody I already knew. So I think that was another part of that was just unique about our conference, only because of the fact that it was in Denton, Texas. But it turned out to work very well. But I do think it's important for all of us at these conferences to meet the younger people coming into the profession, spend time with them, listen to what their job. But the first question I was always asked, tell me what you do. What's your job? What did you play this year? What are you working on? Those kinds of questions, just to see if they know something I don't know.
Well, this might be a good segue into one of the final questions. So what advice would you give to that new teacher or that individual early career person about the career in general, the profession, CBDNA? What advice do you have to the early career professional?
Yeah, I get asked that. In fact, at 4 o'clock yesterday morning, I was answering. I get up early out here in California because I'm 2 hours off. So at 4, I'm answering an email to a young lady at TCU who wrote me saying, I'm finishing up a semester project. I'm writing wind band conductors. I'm a music ed major at TCU. What advice, do you mind giving me some advice about my career? And I always feel a little reticent to do that, but I'll start broad and then get maybe a little more specific. I have a sign off on my email that says, may we live a life worth repeating. And that's one of the pieces of advice I gave her, was make sure you're living a life that you'd repeat, that you're doing positive things and things you're proud of and things that serve. The other thing I wrote her was to be a servant leader. And to not, it's very powerful to stand on the podium in front of a great group of players and make music. You start to think you're pretty important. Start thinking about maybe going out and getting a cape and have everybody call you maestro. I mean, it can happen to the best of us. It is a very phenomenal situation we get to live our lives doing. And one other thing I told her was, don't be afraid to let your students teach you. And it's not unusual these days for me to say, you get those questions, do you? And yes, do you really want the trumpets to play so loud that we can't be heard? From a clarinet player, I go, and I'll stop and I go, thank you for teaching me. Trumpets play softer, That's a question that's really an answer, right? Sometimes the questions students ask you are just out of frustration, So, and you get carried away and you're not listening for that. You're over here working on something else, and this is getting louder and louder. They said, "What's wrong with him? Why isn't he stopping this? We're getting beat up."
That actually sounds like something that Lauren Baker Murray would have said, perhaps
Right.
in those days, her time in the North Texas Wind Symphony.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I think the other thing I really remembered as Mallory would say, tattoo that on your arm. We had a trombonist here, Jeremy Wilson, who was a phenomenal musician and he did his undergraduate work at the University of Tennessee and came to us to work on a master's. And he came in to see me at the end of it was really at the end of the fall, I believe. It might have been the end of the spring, but I think it was the end of the fall. And he said, "I'm going to have to miss the last 2 rehearsals if I can. I have an opportunity to audition." And I said, "Well, sure." I mean, it was after our concert. I said, "We'll work that out for you, absolutely." I said, "Where's the audition?" He said, "Well, the audition is for the Vienna Philharmonic." And it's one of those times you go, "Just a minute." You step out of the room and you call the trombone teacher. You say, "Do we have someone auditioning for the Vienna Philharmonic? I mean, really? They've never hired an American brass player ever." He goes, "Oh yeah, is Jeremy in your office?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Yep, that's right." So I went back in. I said, "Well, sure." I said, "How did this come about?" And he said, "Well, I went to a master class somewhere, maybe in Michigan or something, and he said, I went to a master class and that it was being offered by the trombone section of the Vienna Philharmonic. And after I played later in the day, the principal came to me and said, "We have an opening we'd like you to audition for." And he says, "Okay." And then he said, the principal said, "And we'd like you to come, I'd like you to come a week early so I can do some coaching with you." And he looked at me and he said, "Is that a good thing?" I said, "That's a very good thing. Go." That's a very good thing. And so he won the position. And he came back and was apologizing all over the building about having to leave early and not finishing his master's degree. "I'm not a quitter, but I had this opportunity." He went to the dean and we're all going, pushing him out of the nest. And he was doing a related field in wind band conducting. So he said, I said, "We'll work it out for you, Jeremy. You can come back and do your related field project later. We'll figure it out." So after a couple of years in the orchestra, he came back to play a recital, his final recital. It was ludicrous. And and I said, "Here's what you can do. I'm going to give you an assignment. You talk to our conductors collegium about what it's been like to play in the Vienna Philharmonic under all of the conductors you've played for. Because I know you don't have a regular conductor. It's just a series of guest conductors. And so your perspective about how that goes would be really interesting for all of us." So he came back and he told us, he said, "The first, I was so excited to get there." He said, "I walked in the door my first day of work, real day of work." And they said, "Oh, we're so glad that you're here. The principal is ill. We need you to play principal trombone this week." And he said, "Okay." And he said, what are we doing?" "Electra." And he said, "When's the rehearsal?" They said, "They've already happened." So he had to go in and sight read Electra his first week on the job. So I thought, be sure to tell that story because our players need to hear that and understand what might be expected unexpectedly. And but he said, "Well, I remember that you said I could say anything I wanted to the conductors." I said, "You still can. I mean, anything you want to share with us." So he gets up in front of 45 conductors in the room and goes, "Well, I'd like to thank everybody for inviting me back. And the first thing I want to say to all of you is, it's not about you."
Hmm.
The room fell silent. And he said, "It's about the music and about the people making the music." And that was it. I wanted to yell, "Thank you for teaching me," again, because that is such good advice, and it's easy to forget that we're there for a servant purpose to the people who are trying to make this thing come alive. composer, players, and then for the audience. I mean, we're there for all the elements that put this thing together. So that's what I told this young lady in an early morning piece of advice email. But I think that's still what I think is good advice. Keep a perspective and just learn all you can, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Admit your mistakes. Learn from your mistakes. Mistakes are a sign of learning and progress. Be personable and professional with people. Treat people well and hold people accountable to a high standard. And that's a tough balance. It's not the easiest, sometimes it's not the easiest way to do things. My first year at college teaching, one of my students came to me and was very upset that I wasn't yelling enough at the group. You know, I'd like to talk to you about your teaching. You're not yelling at us enough. And I went, well, it's just not the way I work. So, it doesn't mean I don't care, but I'm not going to yell at you. If I have to yell at you to get you to do this, you might be in the wrong profession, So it's about staying open, remaining teachable, and paying attention to teachable moments that are unexpected. That'd be my advice.
That is great. And just a side note before maybe we get to the last prompt or question, I don't know if you remember, but Jeremy Wilson, the trombonist you're speaking of, he's now the trombone teacher at Vanderbilt. But I remember when Jeremy won the gig and he came back and we all realized that he just won one of the major, orchestral jobs in the world as an
Right.
trombonist who at North Texas never played in the orchestra. He played in the wind symphony only. He was essentially a band kid.
Right. Well, it's even better than that. He at Tennessee, he started in the third band or the last band, whatever it is. And he worked with Ed Powell.
Oh, wow.
One of our conducting graduates who went on to a phenomenal career up in the Northwest. And Ed took such great pride in saying, I worked with this young man when he couldn't play, when he was just, not that he couldn't play, but when he was not at the top. Right. And so there was that connection too, that he had gotten better through bands, through playing in bands. And it was also a shock to everybody when Jeremy won the principal job at Vienna, and then a year or so later gave it up to go back to teach. He decided he's always wanted to teach, which is also a victory in a way. I mean, because we tend to idealize these top orchestra jobs as the only thing anybody would ever want to do. But he really found his calling as a teacher. So now he's at Vanderbilt doing that. It's a great story. His story is just such a great story. Marvelous.
And it goes to show that, what we're doing as teachers is important and it's impactful, and we can create these legacies that hopefully live well longer than we do. So maybe as the last question, I'll just leave it open-ended. How would you like to end the interview? What's the one thing you want to say, piece of advice, funny story? How do you want to finish this up?
I don't know if I have any of that. Well, I think I'm in a different spot in my career now, obviously, than where I was in 1969. And I have found and I'm sure my colleagues that are been in similar situations would say the same thing, that the longer you go, the more and more you appreciate what it is we get to do. And we just finished a great semester of work at North Texas this fall, and we have a great semester lined up. And I'm hopeful that I'm going to be able to continue to do the quality of work that I want to do, but that I also am not overstaying my time. I remember when Alan McMurray decided to retire, I was just shocked. Alan and I went to college together, and we've been dear friends for years. I think in a phone conversation, I said, Alan, I can't believe you're retiring. And he said, I'd rather retire 5 years early than 1 minute too late, which I thought was great advice. So I, I, I always worry about, am I in that 1 minute too late time zone, or am I still being productive enough that my students feel value in being involved in an ensemble I'm working with? And so I reflect on that a lot each year, because now the way I'm working is that I'm not living at home. My wife's living here in California because she is retired, and her twin is here. And out of necessity, she had to come here to be here with her. And so we agreed, it's been 4 years now, that I would live in a palatial Airbnb in Denton, right next to the railroad tracks. It's kind of like a scene from the Blues Brothers when the Chicago's subway goes through. And she's here, and then I'm here over the Christmas, Thanksgiving break, and I'm here over some of the summer. So it's tough being away from home, but it's also something I hate to stop doing, because for all of us as conductors, this is where I'll leave it. When we retire, we give up our instrument. And I always tell Jack Stamp, I envy the fact that he's composing. He's fine percussionist. He's playing in brass band. He's doing all sorts of different things, still in music, writing Up a Storm, writing fantastic music, but he hasn't given up his art. I'm not a composer. I'm not, at this point in my life, a capable clarinetist. Brad Ginevra and I could probably destroy any ensemble as bass clarinetists for at least 10 minutes before it would go south. But the idea that you walk away from it pretty much is something all of us have to someday deal with, And so I'd love to pick the brain of people like, well, Gary Hill, for instance, lives down the road from me here in California. I mean, like 10 minutes away. So whenever I'm home, I call him up and say, can I buy you lunch? Let's talk about things. I mean, it's so great to have a colleague that close. And he's since retired from Arizona State, but very active. He conducted at UCLA all fall as a fill-in while someone was on sabbatical. But so there's that whole thought now in my mind of where this is all going to lead. When is the curtain going to come down, and how to finish? There's been some eloquent decisions made by people about how they finish. Michael Hathcock, for instance, and his final concerts, and the commissions. Geez, 3 phenomenal pieces commissioned for that concert. Mallory Thompson's decision to leave the profession finish, I think, very early for that young lady, but for really important reasons to her and her new husband, and many others. Ray Kramer and his decision to be finished, and on, all these great people that have done so much for our profession. And I miss them as music makers, but still admire them as friends and still look forward to that. Then you have someone like Bob Reynolds, who I don't know if he's ever going to retire. He's going. And the hardest working man in show business, constantly giving back, others, David Whitwell's writing and Frank Battisti's writing and encouragement to people in the profession, and on and on. And so I hope that when it's all said and done, I can find an eloquent way to back out of the situation and not be, drug yelling and screaming from my office, trying to hold on to my desk, and I joke at school about it's going to be just like the scene in Forrest Gump, where Forrest is running. Remember, he decided to run for some reason, and all these people started following him. And he's running and running, and more people are following him. And one day, and he's not saying anything to anybody, one day he stops in the middle of the desert somewhere. Everybody stops, and they're looking at him. One person says, I think he's going to say something. And he turns to the group and he goes, I'm finished. I'm going home.
I remember that.
And everybody's looking at each other like, well, what about us? I don't know, but I'm going home, And so it'll be kind of that way. I said, someday you'll come in, Andrew, and Amy, my two wonderful colleagues, and I'll say, you'll come in and my door will be locked and the light will be off. And there'll be a note on it that says, you know, please burn my scores in the parking lot and you can have all my books. I'll be calling you.
I'm going home.
Right.
Well, first of all, don't burn the scores. I'm happy to take them. And
Okay.
thank you, Gene, on behalf of CBDNA, the wind band world, and conductor, artists, teachers everywhere for what you've done for us, and the legacy that you're still creating and that you'll leave at some point. But I think it goes without saying that you're one of the beacons of our profession, and we wouldn't be where we are now had you not come along. So thank you.
Thank you, Nick.